calls for more humanitarian assistance grows as millions of people in 4 African countries face starvation and famine. Environmentalists plan to push back as U.S. President Donald Trump reverses the Obama administration policies on greenhouse gases. And a film depicting a freedom fighter who helped write South Africa's constitution. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Now we begin tonight in West Africa, where the Nigeria Center for Disease Control says an outbreak of meningitis in Nigeria has killed 269 people in recent weeks. The disease center says 1,800 suspected cases of meningitis were reported as of Monday. Meningitis is the inflammation of tissue surrounding the brain and spinal cord, which can be caused by viral or bacterial infections. It spreads mainly through kissing, sneezing, or coughing. The disease center says it is working with the World Health Organization, the UN Children's Fund, and Doctors Without Borders to try to control the outbreak. More than 3,000 people a day are fleeing their homes in search of food and water due to Somalia's worst drought in 20 years. That's according to the Norwegian Refugee Council. The council is also warning of an impending famine, with children already dying of malnutrition. The devastating drought has decimated harvests and livestock in the war-torn country, posing the threat of renewed famine 6 years after a similar crisis in which 260,000 people died. Families are abandoning dying cattle to beg for food in urban areas where food prices are soaring. In Washington, the Committee on Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights and International Organizations held a hearing on East Africa's quiet famine. Officials from various humanitarian organizations urged Congress to reject the Trump administration's proposed cuts to foreign aid.
The proposed cuts include slashing or eliminating altogether the very accounts that finance the U.S. government support for emergency response. And I would just like to highlight 3 specific accounts that will be severely impacted if the cuts in fact come to effect. One is the Food for Peace account, which funds food aid. The second is the International Disaster Assistance, which funds non-food items, including water and medical services. We know what conditions look like in refugee camps. They are breeding grounds for all kinds of diseases, so this account is critically important. The third account I would like to highlight is the Migration and Refugee Assistance, which provides U.S. support to refugees in neighboring countries. For example, refugee crisis right now residing in Somalia, in Kenya and Ethiopia.
Well, more than 6 million Somalis, half of the population, need emergency aid, including close to 1 million acutely malnourished children. Now, the next time you have a bite to eat, a snack, or sit down to dinner, take a moment to consider that 20 million people across most of 4 countries in Africa and the Middle East are at risk of starvation and famine. VOA's Paul Sisko reports.
The United Nations' Stephen O'Brien says the world is facing its greatest humanitarian crisis since the end of World War II.
More than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine.
Stephen Laurier is the UNICEF representative in Baidoa.
We've seen this morning as well in a nutritional center all these severely, acutely malnourished babies. Very, very sad story, where we also see the figures going up.
David Orr is the Southern African World Food Program spokesperson.
South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, and Nigeria, the United Nations humanitarian operations in these 4 countries require more than $5.6 billion this year, and at least $4.4 billion required to the end of March to avert a catastrophe. And so far, the UN has only received $90 million. So that's 2 cents for every dollar needed.
Relief agencies estimate up to 15 million people in Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya are facing food and water shortages. Just 6 years ago, more than 250,000 Somalis died in drought-induced famine. AID officials say food and water exist on the planet to meet everyone's needs. But armed conflicts, often created by just a very few men, result in the misery and chaos of millions, destroying markets, crops, making necessities scarce, and the money to buy them unattainable. In starving South Sudan, both rebel soldiers, led in part by Riek Machar, and President Salva Kiir's government soldiers intentionally block emergency food distribution, often by hijacking food trucks, leaving entire communities marooned in swamps filled with disease and with little to eat other than chewable plants and only dirty water to wash with and drink. On Saturday, 6 aid workers and their Kenyan escort were ambushed and killed in South Sudan while traveling from the capital Juba toward the needy in the town of Pibor. Jens Lark is with the United Nations Office of Humanitarian Affairs.
It is a country which is in the depth of a very, very vicious war. But of course, those who are responsible must be held to account.
In northeastern Nigeria, the battle grinds on between Islamic terrorists, Boko Haram and others, and the Nigerian military. The conflict has displaced millions of people, leaving more than 10 million people in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. That need has also spread to the surrounding countries in the Lake Chad region. Meanwhile, in Yemen, a trade blockade and steady aerial bombings by Saudi Arabia have destroyed the nation's economy, sending food prices soaring and pushing hundreds of thousands of mostly children to the brink of starvation. Despite scientific evidence that climate change is increasing the frequency of drought and floods, it is mostly man's inhumanity to man, not rising temperatures or this season's lack of rain, that has left many nations across Africa parched, malnourished, and in danger of famine. Paul Sisko, VOA News, Washington.
Well, a court in Ivory Coast has found former First Lady Simone Bagbo not guilty Tuesday of crimes against humanity allegedly committed during the 2011 post-election violence. Bagbo is accused of leading a cell that carried out violent reprisals against opponents of her husband, ex-president Laurent Gbagbo, including supplying it with weapons and attack helicopters. Human Rights Watch and victims' rights groups in Ivory Coast say they're disappointed with the verdict, which they say leaves a lot of questions about her role in the violence unanswered.
We are now convinced that the Ivorian state has neither the willingness nor the capacity to bring about justice for the victims. Its justice has shown that Simone Bagbo dossier in the hearing before the court that it's unwilling to hold Simone Bagbo accountable, to judge and convict her for the facts for which she is accused of. We demand that the ICC's arrest warrant against Madame Simone Bagbo be enforced immediately.
Well, prosecutors have 60 days to appeal the decision. Simone Bagbo is currently serving a 20-year prison term on previous charges of endangering the state. Her husband is on trial in The Hague for alleged crimes against humanity. Well, Britain started the process of leaving the European Union on Tuesday after British Prime Minister Theresa May triggered Article 50, kicking off 2 years of negotiations of what promises to be a lengthy and complex process of ending 4 decades of engagement with the European Union. VOA Europe correspondent Luis Ramirez has the details.
There is very little that Britons agree on when it comes to Brexit, but everyone agrees that ending 4 decades of integration with Europe will be a messy process.
The effect of European Union law is all pervasive, from constitutional level questions to the regulation of bananas and cucumbers at the bottom end of the spectrum. So it is a mammoth task that will not be negotiated within 2 years. It will take a decade or decades to give full effect to EU withdrawal.
The formal withdrawal will take time. In Bristol, the strike against globalism and homogeneity began 5 years ago with the launching of the Bristol pound, a currency whose value is equal to the pound sterling but can only be spent in the city. For local businesses like this non-profit bike repair shop and cafe, it is about keeping money in the local economy and quality of life.
Not having the money that's taken in the city kind of siphoned off going up the chain of command in some big corporation. It's about paying people for the labour that they do in the city that we live in. It's important to resist, to some extent, that kind of homogenisation and, you know, every town and city looking the same. I don't see that as particularly interesting or particularly good for the people who live in any of those places.
Wall and other backers of the Bristol pound voted against Brexit, but with mixed feelings. Many here say they want integration with Europe and free trade, but also a system that protects local economies and cultures.
We all value that stuff. Nobody kind of disagrees with it, but we don't have an economic system at a global level that's allowing it to flourish. So we have to make interventions, and that's what we decided to do here in Bristol.
Brexit is now a reality, and going it alone for some does not seem as scary as it did a few months ago.
We don't yet seem to have seen the kind of enormous economic catastrophe that was predicted. That said, we haven't actually left yet. We've only just triggered Article 50, so how it plays out over the next few years, I don't know.
For the time being, and amid the uncertainty, the people of Bristol have spawned a revolution of their own. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, Bristol, England.
Well, here in the U.S., President Donald Trump is reversing the Obama administration's policies on greenhouse gases. An executive order signed Tuesday takes aim at power plant emission rules and other policies the White House says undermine economic growth. Environmental groups say the president is ignoring the serious threat of climate change, and they are planning to push back. VOA's Steve Baragona reports.
You know what it says, right? You're going back to work.
President Trump ordered a rewrite of rules aimed at cutting greenhouse gases from U.S. power plants. He says it's all about bringing back jobs.
Perhaps no single regulation threatens our miners, energy workers, and companies more than this crushing attack on American industry.
The Obama administration had aimed to cut carbon dioxide from power plants by a third from 2005 levels by 2030. Trump's executive action also lifts rules on coal, oil, and gas production and downgrades the role of climate change in other federal regulations. It follows another order reconsidering the Obama administration's strict fuel efficiency standards. In his budget proposal, Trump targets climate change programs across the federal government, says White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney.
Regarding the question as to climate change, I think the president was fairly straightforward. We're not spending money on that anymore. We consider that to be a waste of your money.
The Trump administration is at odds with the scientific consensus that human-made greenhouse gases are dangerously warming the planet. And the federal government has a legal obligation to curb them, says Environmental Defense Fund Policy Chief Tomas Carbonell.
The Supreme Court has already held on 3 separate occasions that EPA has the authority and the responsibility under the Clean Air Act to address the threat of climate change.
Regulators will have to write new rules to replace the ones the president struck down. Environmental groups are expecting to challenge them in court.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
The order does not pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, but experts say it looks less and less likely that the United States will meet its Paris targets. Steve Baragona, VOA News, Washington.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. And also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCord. Now, coming up, Soft Vengeance, a film depicting a freedom fighter who helped write South Africa's constitution. Stay with us.
I am Sheka Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
Well, in today's business news, there are 2 interesting developments in the tech space this week. One in microfinancing and the other in smartphone shipments. Well, joining us now from New York with the details is Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrina. Jill.
Hi there. So Bitbond, a German firm facilitating PTP loans via the Bitcoin blockchain, is teaming up with payment services provider BPesa to improve access to financing for small businesses in Africa. The integration is now live in Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, and Tanzania. There's a huge unmet demand for microfinancing in sub-Saharan Africa, and this could potentially help a lot of small business owners who struggle to get traditional financing.
Well, now, speaking of banking sector, Barclays is looking again to sell more of its African assets, right?
Yeah, that's right. Barclays is in exclusive talks to sell its stake in its Zimbabwe unit to Malawi-based First Merchant Bank. The lenders had mentioned this just yesterday. As the British bank continues its exit from Africa, Barclays previously said it was looking to sell the stake as part of its broader exit from Africa announced a year ago, when CEO Jess Staley said the lender would instead focus on transatlantic strategy in the U.S. and Britain.
And what's happening with the smartphone sales?
This is interesting to follow because in the U.S., we are obsessed with smartphone cycles and oversaturation of the market as an indicator for economic growth. Now, according to a new release by International Data Corp, smartphone shipments to Africa grew by only 3.4% year over year. That's a sharp slump compared to double-digit growth rates recorded in recent years. The slowdown in smartphone shipments was down to economic headwinds in some of the continent's leading markets. Nigeria, Africa's largest market, had a particularly tough year to hold on to its top spot. Now, Samsung has reworked its product portfolio, now offers mobile phone models at competitive prices. That tweak will prove crucial in coming years as lower-priced Chinese brands look to grow market share, which is why I think a company like Apple has stayed away from the African market, because they simply can't compete with lower pricing.
As always, thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you.
That's Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrina reporting from New York. Well, our next story features scenes from a historical documentary that tells the story of freedom fighter, attorney and human rights advocate Albie Sachs, who spent more than 60 years fighting apartheid. He was arrested, held in solitary confinement, tortured, exiled, and he lost an arm in a car bombing. VOA's Caroline Turner introduces us to the film Soft Vengeance, Albie Sachs and the New South Africa.
A bomb explodes in 1988, and the life of a freedom fighter is forever altered. The archival film, Soft Vengeance, Albie Sachs and the New South Africa, illuminates the struggles of the legal scholar and constitutional court justice.
That moment every freedom fighter waits for. Will they come for me today? And they'd come for me, and I'd survived.
It's not as if you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to speak up. It's whatever the consequences, I can't accept this.
When he made the decision that he was going to sit on benches that were segregated and make a statement, for Albie, it was a natural thing to do that.
So this is what it's like. Alone in a concrete cube. The head of the interrogation comes to me. He says, "You sure you don't want to say something?"
The film highlights Sachs' key career moves with the African National Congress, but Sachs credits jazz musicians for writing the New South Africa Constitution.
Mozambique was a heartbeat for us. It was about creating a different type of society altogether.
But there was a moment when, jazz represented the spirit of the future and the spirit of people being able to come together and what a non-apartheid state would look like in South Africa. And many of the white people involved in this struggle, kind of grew up listening to Black Cape Town jazz and feel like it's in their blood. And so that's, I think, what Albie meant by saying that the Constitution had been written by our musicians before we sat down to put it to words.
The film includes a revealing interview with the person responsible for the bomb.
Henry was willing to be interviewed by me because my assessment of him and what he's doing is that he really still wants some kind of forgiveness from Albie that he hasn't quite gotten.
Nothing that I did out of my own means. I did because I was a soldier and I got an instruction. I'm just a functionary for the state. That's what I am. There's a threat against my country. I have to take action.
Sachs was later invited to co-author the Constitution and appointed to the Constitutional Court by Nelson Mandela.
Here, after 24 years in political exile, Albie Sachs, being greeted by his mother at Cape Town Airport.
He is the real Mr. Constitution. He is the real Mr. Bill of Rights.
I, Albert Louis Sachs, do hereby swear that in my capacity as Judge of the Constitutional Court of the Republic of South Africa, I will uphold and protect the Constitution of the Republic and the fundamental rights entrenched therein.
Lying in bed recovering, I receive a note. Don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. Avenge me? We're going to chop off the arms? We're going to blind people? Where's that going to get us? But if we get democracy in South Africa and freedom, that will be my soft vengeance.
The filmmaker explains why the film is important.
I feel like, well, maybe I can make a film that will help share their story with a larger audience and explain, you know, why they have both an inspirational life and maybe can lead other people to, you know, both appreciate what their lives have meant and use it as inspiration for their own commitments.
The film captures Albie Sachs' achievements as well as the essence of the period. Carolyn Turner, VOA News.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. It's only the size of a tissue box, but this laboratory is helping scientists carry out experiments. We'll be right back.
Troisième dose ya tétracoque. Ngana tétracoque, ubungura jare. Yoni première dose.
Welcome back. Now, I recently asked our social media followers to tell me whether you think your country provides you with enough opportunities for growth, or do you feel compelled to move to another country in order to make it? We received a lot of thoughtful and some heart-wrenching comments, and I want to share them with you. So here we go. Augustine Ken from Liberia says, my country, Liberia, is trying to do what is best, but there is a lot more to be done to meet the demands of the people. Tot Nyal Kwol from South Sudan cries out, my country, South Sudan, is almost finished. Let Africa be 53 countries. We are out of Africa because my people are dying every day. Omar Abdi Karim Musa from Borame in Somalia says, we the youth struggle by ourselves in Somalia. Lack of government and civil wars have been going on since 1999. Jemed Ahmed Yusuf from Freetown in Sierra Leone describes a harsh reality. He says the status quo in Sierra Leone is forcing youths to a mass exodus to unknown destinations. We are suffering from so many things like lack of access to energy and power and slow economic growth. Well, and finally, Collins Andrew from Tanzania has some good news. He says, in Tanzania, there is enough peace. Our government has done enough. What's left is for the youth to work on the opportunities around. Well, thank you very much for your responses, and please keep them coming. Now, here's my next question to you. Do you think it is drought or poor governance that is most responsible for famine in Africa? Now, to participate in our social media segment, visit Facebook. The address is Africa54, and let us know what you think. Or send me a tweet at VOA Vince McCory. Now, a tiny satellite launched by India that is circling the Earth contains a laboratory that is only the size of a tissue box. The lab is helping scientists carry out experiments that range from finding ways to improve pharmaceuticals to perfecting the foam in coffee. VOA's Deborah Block has the story.
An orbiting mini-lab is a new way for researchers to work in space. With little interference from Earth's gravity, cells and molecules behave differently. That helps researchers make discoveries in fields from medicine to agriculture. Usually such experiments are conducted at the International Space Station or on parabolic airplane flights that have short bursts of weightlessness. Developed by an Israeli-Swiss firm called Space Pharma, the satellite mini-lab opens up new frontiers for research.
Space Pharma provides the first ever designed, launched, and commercial satellite laboratory that now is available for many clients wherever they are, in order to be able them to run their own designed experiment in microgravity. And this is the new technology that we are now proposing to the market in order to develop better drugs, better medicines, better research, and better products for humanity.
He explains how clients can remotely control scientific experiments anywhere from Earth.
We are installing the software in the client location within his computer. He is playing with the parameters to build his sequencing of steps and how he would like to run the experiment.
The clients receive data and images from the experiment, which can be run multiple times to test different reactions. Right now, the satellite contains 4 experiments. Next year, Space Pharma hopes to send up satellites that each can hold about 160 experiments. Deborah Block, VOA News, Washington.
Well, and that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That's Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. An alley is a narrow path between or behind buildings.
Up one's alley.
Does this expression have to do with city streets?
Jonathan, do you have any friends who teach singing?
Hello. I am a singer.
You are? Oh, awesome. Do you